and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today, we are wrapping up the series on Natasha Romanoff by discussing her final appearances, at least chronologically. I am thrilled that we are getting more of her soon, but before that, we need to talk about the ending of her story. First, we are going to discuss her role as a team leader in Infinity War and Endgame, then compare her arc to those of her male teammates, and finally get into the overall impact of her story. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, she is one of the secret Avengers during Infinity War. Obviously, a lot more screen time is spent on other storylines instead of this one, so we have only about 5 minutes to figure out what she's been up to since Civil War. Importantly, she is very obviously a co-leader of the team. Look at her interactions with the children of Thanos, or Ross, or even in Wakanda. We can see that she is not deferring to Steve, and that makes sense, since we can pretty safely assume he had to learn a thing or two from her about staying below the radar these past few years.
First rule of going on the run is don't run, walk.
Next, she clearly has a very good relationship with Wanda, perhaps being her mentor, since Nat is the one to bring up the agreement they have apparently made about Wanda going to see Vision.
Stay close, check in. Don't take any chances. I'm sorry.
Clearly Nat gave her some tips to keep from being noticed while she and Vision are seeing each other. We don't get a lot of screen time between these two, but they work together during the battle as well.
She's not alone.
I'm a little frustrated that we can't tell if Nat has been to Wakanda before. We don't see her reaction to T'Challa or Okoye to see if it's a warm greeting or not. But in any case, she is glad that they have a plan and to be part of the mission. She taunts Proxima Midnight during the parley before the battle.
Where's your other friend?
Nat has always been, well,
comfortable with everything.
but I really enjoy how she's approaching this war, which is pretty different from what she's done before.
This is monsters and magic and nothing we were ever trained for.
Makes you wonder what she might have been up to since Civil War. If only there was some way to know. Anyway, the fight happens. It's pretty chaotic. She is holding her own though. We don't really see her until Thor arrives. I don't know if she's pleased to see him or more just,
this might as well happen. Life is already so goddamn weird.
I love this interaction. I talked in my previous video about Wanda and Nat being part of a team, and that's clearly still the case here. Wanda saves Okoye and Nat, then Nat and Okoye save Wanda. It's great. I love how proud Nat looks of Wanda for saving them, and how fiercely she fights Proxima. And then, of course, this line when Wanda saves them again.
That's really gross.
Such a great moment of Nat bonding with people by cracking jokes.
Shall we play a game?
Anybody ever tell you you're a little paranoid?
Not to my face. Why? Did you hear something?
But anyway, they still lose, despite all the plans and contingency plans that they put in place. Something Nat certainly had a hand in doing, since that's her style.
If we can't read the file, maybe we can find out where it came from.
And she is clearly in shock. Not to get too much into speculation here, but I think she is so upset because her team is dead. Yeah, all the original Avengers are still here, but the people she trained up and worked with, Sam, Wanda, Vision, all vanished or were killed right in front of her. That's basically her worst nightmare. She would see it as a catastrophic failure even without everything else.
Oh, God.
Then we get to Endgame. Nat starts it how you would expect, gathering as much intel as she can, regrouping the team, figuring out what assets they have. It's what she knows to do when there's a problem. When they have a lead, she is excited to rally the troops, and she and Steve continue to share leadership, despite it being the old team back together again. They go to space? This is cute.
Who here hasn't been to space?
She reassures Steve because, of course, this is something she's always done.
This is gonna work, Steve.
The plan is apparently everyone else will restrain Thanos while Steve and Nat question him, which is fun and strategic. She does indeed ask him a very important question.
Where are the stones?
But they're too late. And then we jump forward 5 years. That's a long time. Do you know how long the Avengers were together? 4 years. From 2012 to 2016, when Civil War happened. Keep that in mind. During those 5 years, the Hulk apparently figured some stuff out with Banner, and now they're Professor Hulk. I haven't read those comics and I don't know what that means, but people seem to like him. Tony and Pepper settled down and had a daughter. Steve seems to have gotten some kind of therapy because now he's leading support groups. Sam's influence, obviously. And Thor, well, perhaps someone could get him some therapy. Same goes for Clint. He seems to have decided to become a gritty 90s anti-hero between movies. So while Steve and Tony have clearly retired and Thor and Clint have fallen into bad coping mechanisms, what is Nat doing? Well, she's keeping the team together.
Anyone's making trouble where they shouldn't comes through me.
Okay.
It's a new team, but she's good at it and has clearly
Beat him into shape.
Most people just remember this part of this scene, but I think it's important to look at how she is at the beginning. She may be overly worried about handling an underwater earthquake, but the rest of the team is hardly there out of pity for her.
Get a reading on those tremors?
'Twas a mild subduction under the African plate.
She's a good leader, or they wouldn't still be answering to her. Importantly, Rhodey is the only one on the team who was before. Carol and Okoye, and especially Rocket, would hardly be there, taking orders, if she wasn't a competent leader. But then the subject of Clint comes up, and that's when Nat breaks down. That's what causes her depression peanut butter sandwich making session. She lets herself break down when she's alone, and I do appreciate getting to see this side of her, especially when she tries to hide it from everyone. Much like seeing it in Avengers, it means a lot to see her be overwhelmed, but then overcome it. And then Steve is there, and he tries his therapy angle on her, but it doesn't work.
I'm about to hit you in the head with a peanut butter sandwich.
She tells him to get a life, which... One thing to notice in this scene is the ballet shoes on the chair. I wonder if she still dances. If she's always danced, ever since this. Anyway, Ant-Man arrives, and we get some hope at last. Maybe there is a way to change things.
Are you talking about a time machine?
I love how happy and excited she is in these scenes. Lab buddies with Professor Hulk.
Oh my god.
Taking studious notes on everything. I especially love how she is in between Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, the smartest men alive, and she is the one to figure out when there are multiple stones in the same place.
Guys, if you pick the right year, there are 3 stones in New York.
We have no choice but to stan. She goes to get Clint from his dark side antics, and it's a good progression of their relationship. When she
Made a name for myself.
He saved her by believing in her, by giving her a chance.
He made a different call.
And now she gets to repay the favor. More of her being an adorable nerd, so thrilled to finally have a definitive path forward.
See you in a minute.
Time heists happen. She and Clint go to Vormir, and... well, I'm going to talk a lot more about this in another section. But she again gets to have good ideas.
Thanos left her with the stone without his daughter. It's not a coincidence.
Be reassuring and compassionate.
I don't judge people on their worst mistakes.
And then... be barely mentioned for the rest of the movie. Whoops, suddenly this became negative. Let's take that energy to the next section and talk about how Natasha is written compared to her teammates. So, the time heists. Let's review what those were all about. Before I get into the gender differences, I want to discuss how the original Avengers are involved versus how the other heroes are involved.
No,
Come
you
on.
never wanted a time heist. You weren't on board with the time heist.
I dropped the ball.
You ruined the time heist.
Is that what I did?
The Hulk, Tony, and Steve all go to get the 3 stones that are in New York at the same time. Hulk gets the Time Stone, Steve gets the Mind Stone, Tony attempts to get the Space Stone, Thor goes to get the Reality Stone from Asgard, Clint and Natasha go together to get the Soul Stone. So, the Power Stone is the only one that is not sought by an original Avenger. The remaining heroes fill in to help out. Ant-Man joins Tony and Steve.
That's America's ass.
Rocket joins Thor because he has a pretty good rapport with Thor.
You sure you're up to this particular motor mission?
Who needs a bit of help on this mission? And then Rhodey, who is an Avenger, of course, for longer than anyone but Natasha, just unfortunately off screen, and he is in charge of working with Nebula to get the stone she knows most about. Their dynamic is great.
So he's an idiot.
Yeah. I wasn't always like this.
Me either. But we work with what we got, right?
And I wonder if Tony insisted on her having company after they were adrift in space together.
And you've won. Congratulations.
Now let's talk about what each person gets from this trip. We'll start with Rhodey, because he doesn't get a lot from it. He goes there, makes fun of Quill, grabs the stone, and goes back. Easy peasy.
Get that stone and come back. No messing around.
Similarly, Rocket goes on the mission, gets the stone, goes back.
I got the thing. Come on, we gotta move.
Scott has a bit of setback on his mission,
What are we improvising?
Scott, get this back to the compound.
and goes back. The rest of the characters get a bit more from the experience. We have Professor Hulk, who goes back to see and act like 2012 Hulk.
I think it's gratuitous, but whatever.
It's funny, but it also shows his personal growth. He gets a lot of exposition, which is helpful for the plot, but not particularly relevant to this discussion. Similarly, Steve goes back to see his former self.
That is America's ass.
He gets to show some personal growth, including the ability to blend into a situation,
Hail Hydra.
something he certainly learned as a secret Avenger with Natasha. And then he also gets to see Peggy again, which foreshadows where his arc will end. Side note, I have, a lot of thoughts about this, but those will have to be saved for another episode. I am getting to Nat, I promise. Tony and Thor have similar experiences. They both get to see a parent. Thor gets gentle affirmation from his mother.
Now you go and be the man you're meant to be.
Seeing her one last time, and her support gives him the strength to face his problems again. Tony sees his father and gets closure on that relationship, including telling him about his granddaughter.
I have a little girl.
So, thus far, 2 of the original Avengers have gotten some much-needed catharsis.
I'm still worthy.
Just say that the greater good has rarely outweighed my own self-interest.
And 2 have demonstrated just how much they've learned from their experiences since 2012. And what about the ladies? What do Nebula and Natasha get from the time heists? Well, Nebula also gets to see her parent.
No. He knows.
Except hers is an abusive villain who has been dead for 5 years. She also gets to see her past self.
You're weak. I'm you.
As well as the past version of her sister. And while, like the gentleman, she has also clearly grown and changed a lot since she was her 2014 self, that just makes all of this worse for her.
Bring her to my ship.
She's the reason Thanos finds out what they are doing, and even gets to their timeline to attack them. And this ends with her having to literally kill her former self.
You can change. He won't let me.
And what does Natasha get? Well, to die. So, if we frame this like the previous ones, this is supposed to be some closure for her arc, which I'd say is certainly happening. She is obviously thrilled to be able to do something for the people she's lost, to finally be able to move on from that.
We found something.
More personally, she's very excited to include Clint, to bring him in from the cold and go on this mission with him.
A long way from Budapest.
And I know the gender binary doesn't work perfectly here, because Clint comes back from the mission like this.
How do I look?
But Nat's the one who has to die, because
I have no place in the world.
I'm not going to do a rewrite of how this movie should have paired up characters, or even how getting the Soul Stone should have gone. That's what fanfic is for. But even just switching who gets the stone and who sacrifices for it could have been big for Natasha's arc. Clint is already acting as a dark copy of her path, and seeing herself reflected in his sacrifice here could have taken her full circle and finally move on from the Red Room.
That I was anything more than the assassin they made me.
Anyway, I'm just saying that in a fun movie that nostalgically reminds us of all the past movies, where our most fleshed out characters get catharsis, and to demonstrate how they've grown and changed, the only female Avenger gets death to atone for some crimes that we never even saw.
I got on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar in a bad way.
You know, I started this channel because of this, and this, and this, all happening in the same year, because I wanted to talk about female characters in big budget mainstream projects, and almost exclusively those written by men. Because here's the thing, fellas, if you're going to include a member of, 51% of the population, please give some thought into how that's gonna go. And if you're only gonna have one, you're going to have to be very careful with what happens to her. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, why'd you string us along about her getting a movie for 10 years just to throw her off a cliff? How can you make two separate teams of heroes where there is one lady in each of them and then kill them both the same way? How did this get through production without anyone noticing? To be clear, I am not saying that Nat wouldn't do this. She absolutely would.
That's all it's been about, bringing everybody back.
But there is a wants versus needs discussion you should have for any character. What she wants is to prove herself, to wipe the red from her ledger. What she needs is for someone, literally anyone, to tell her that her past is not her fault, that she is a good person, very much in spite of how she was raised. So having Clint sacrifice himself here could have been what she needed. Everyone else sees their past self to demonstrate their growth, or a parent to reaffirm their identities as heroes. Nat learns her father's name, and Clint should have been how she demonstrated her growth. If he sacrificed himself, she would see where her relentless drive to redeem herself could take her. That instead of attempting to absolve others of guilt,
it's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing.
You're not a threat to me.
None of that's your fault, Steve.
No one blamed you, Bruce.
Don't do that to yourself, Clint.
she really needs to turn that inward and accept that her past was what it was, and she has moved on from it. Instead, the narrative proves her right. It suggests that what she did while essentially brainwashed has forever doomed her.
Given your service record, both for this country and against it, that you belong in a penitentiary.
Is she a spy too? They start that young?
I did.
You'll break them.
Only the breakable ones. You're made of marble.
Boy, it must be hard to shake the double agent thing, huh? Sticks in the DNA.
Are you sure you're ready for the world to see you as you really are?
You lie and kill in the service of liars and killers.
Endgame doesn't have the staggeringly bad writing and obvious misogyny that Rise of Skywalker has, and it doesn't have the insidious moral of women cannot handle power that Game of Thrones has. It is a much better story. But, like most of the MCU, it is terribly uninterested in considering its female characters as people, as neither action figures nor props for the male story. In contrast, Vision, a very minor character before WandaVision, with only 23 minutes of screen time in the whole MCU, gets great character moments like this. And, importantly, after getting stabbed by Corvus Glaive, he makes a surprise attack to rescue Steve by stabbing Glaive the same way. I'm saying Vision must be in high def because he gets a better resolution than any female character. Wanda loses everything and doesn't even get to kill Thanos.
You will.
Captain Marvel is barely here at all and has no clear personal connection to the story. Pepper Potts isn't shown on screen with her daughter until they're attending her husband's funeral. Gamora died, proving that her abusive father did love her enough to profit from killing her, but we have a time-snatched version of her, so she can still be in the next movie. Nebula murdered her former self for presumably the same reason. So yeah, I appreciate that the ladies on set thought of this cool shot, and I am glad to see them all. And if you want to call that Nat's legacy, then sure, she can be the poster girl of female characters being used as story fodder and never actually getting fleshed out, where we are told their stories are over despite never seeing them. Nat spent 9 years on screen and 5 off saving the world, but that was never enough to take care of the red in her ledger. Red we never saw, but she still had to atone for by saving half the universe. Good for her, that's quite a feat, but it just confirms that she could never do anything to make up for whom she used to be. Loki asks the question,
Can you wipe out that much red?
and this seems to be the answer. Yes, but only if you save 50% of sentient creatures in the process. What exactly did Nat do to demand such a price? And that brings us to part 3. The previews for the Black Widow movie have taken a certain angle.
How much do you really know about the elusive Natasha Romanoff?
You don't know everything about me.
It's time for her story.
And I'm pretty cynical about that. Yeah, we don't know her story. I've been waiting over 10 years to finally hear it. But why, you may be asking? She's been in 7 films in 10 years. That's a lot. She's had a whole hour and 53 minutes of screen time. Yeah, I know. But what do we really know about her? I'm not saying we should compare her to the dudes who have trilogies. Obviously, they're going to be more fleshed out. But let's look at how other characters without trilogies have been developed. The Hulk has a little more screen time than Nat, but if we take out the canon movie, that's only about an hour and a half. So like Natasha, his character development happens in team-up movies or off-screen. And also like Natasha, what he was doing during the blip is huge for his character development.
18 months in the gamma lab. I put the brains and the brawn together.
But unlike Natasha, Marvel had a pretty clear indication that no one was very interested in his story. His solo movie made $138 million compared to Iron Man's $318 million the same year. Whether you agree with this decision or not, Marvel determined it was not worth it to put more money into the Hulk. And Marvel also made this decision for Black Widow. For 10 years, calls for her to have her own movie just meant she replaced other female characters in some man's movie. And what financial decision was behind that? Well, female-led movies make less money, of course. This is a bit of a tangent, but Captain Marvel did better than any solo movie other than Black Panther. I imagine this is why they decided to go ahead with a Black Widow movie, but I find it pretty insidious what these two films also have in common. They're the only prequels in the MCU. Not super interested in seeing Ant-Man? Well, you gotta go see it, because he's gonna be in Civil War. Not interested in Thor? Well, you gotta go see it for Infinity War to make sense. But did you really need to see Captain Marvel to watch the rest of the MCU? No, it's in the 90s. It introduces you to the character, but it doesn't build up to the next film. You could say that Cap 1 is a prequel, which it sort of is, but it was way back in Phase 1, and is still pretty important to the larger MCU. So Nat getting a prequel that at least seems to be set entirely in 2016, and having no real ramifications beyond explaining what she was doing between Civil War and Infinity War, well, that's not really how Marvel got to dominating the box office. And maybe her movie will have long-lasting impact, but...
Don't give me hope.
Anyway, back to comparisons. Loki has less screen time than Nat, and oh, look, he has a solo TV show. Clint has less screen time than Nat. Yeah, look at that. He has an upcoming TV show as well. But even though she has an upcoming movie, her story is over. And let's go back to gender as we talk about those solo projects and Endgame. We get this tease for Loki, we get this one for Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We don't get anything for Wanda or for Nat. And let's really look at this scene. What I find baffling is that right before Steve goes back in time, Nat gets brought up again.
When I had the gauntlet, the stones, I really tried to bring her back.
It's been a while since she was mentioned. She didn't have a funeral, so why bring her up now, Bruce? Then Steve leaves and doesn't come back. Bucky spots him over there, and I just have to wonder, why don't we find out what happened on Vormir? How did Steve put back that stone?
A soul for a soul.
I don't want to speculate, but you know what would have been a great tease for her solo movie? If the scene played out more like this.
Well, get him back. I'm trying. Get him the hell back.
Man, I said I'm trying.
Sam.
But of course, we didn't even know she would get a solo movie for a few months after this came out. Again, as far as their very successful model goes, doing nothing in the movies that everyone is going to see to advertise her upcoming one is a little strange.
Sloppy.
The ending of this movie is both closing out the Infinity Saga, but also showing that there are more stories to tell with these characters. We know a lot about them, especially Bucky, and I want to get into why. Thinking back to Civil War, I remember reading a post that pointed out how strange it is that Steve and Bucky in Wakanda is an end credit scene.
You know, if they find out he's here, they'll come for him.
It's strange because this is a Captain America movie. Shouldn't the resolution of Steve's arc be in the main film? Especially given how integral Bucky was to the plot as a whole, even if he's more of a MacGuffin. Putting his resolution in the end credit scene is sort of an odd choice.
So until they figure out how to get this stuff out of my head, I think going back under is the best thing.
This made me think of how often this happens. Bucky discovers who he is in the Winter Soldier end credit scene. There's even a clip from Civil War of Bucky as the end credit scene for Ant-Man. He goes into cryosleep in the end credits. He is freed of brainwashing in the end credits, to then conveniently be available to fight and die in Infinity War, with the majority of his story told in short segments after the main story. And I bring this up because, well, that means we actually know his story more than Natasha's. There is a gift set that uses these parallels between Natasha and Bucky, and one of the main comments on it is about how we are trained to empathize with Bucky. We see who he was before, how he became the Winter Soldier. We see him in action as the Winter Soldier, and we see how terrible his journey into becoming an assassin was, and his subsequent navigation of that guilt.
You didn't have a choice.
But I did it.
And Natasha had all the same things happen. She was also, at least according to Age of Ultron, made into an assassin against her will, got out of that life, and the whole MCU is essentially her dealing with that guilt. Except, unlike with Bucky, we see none of this from her perspective. Well, okay, we briefly see a chaotic dream sequence that presumably has some truth to it, but going off of Steve's and Thor's visions, the validity is questionable. In any case, we don't see her taken into the program. We don't see how she got out of it or why. She tells Loki the story, but we don't see anything at any point in the MCU. How much more meaningful would this scene be if we saw what it's reframing?
Agent Barton was sent to kill me. He made a different call.
She talks about her guilt to Steve and is often assuaging the guilt of those around her, but we never, ever see what she should feel guilty for. Hell, in this trippy scene where she presumably kills this dude, we still don't even see it. Every other scene where she fights someone, she's working for the good guys.
But I guess I just traded in the KGB for Hydra.
Villains regularly throw her past in her face, but we never see her do any of those things. Pierce threatens her with the fact that now everyone will know who she really is, which goes exactly nowhere. She talks in front of Congress and they allude to her past, but nothing specific. We have only ever seen her be a hero. So we have never seen her backstory. We know Bucky's, we see it, we empathize, we hope he finds closure. Do we wish that for Natasha? Well, maybe, but not explicitly. She seems to like her job. We have no idea what happened to her before, not really. So we are not taught to have the same level of empathy for her, one of the original Avengers, that we do for Bucky, a relatively minor character / damsel in distress. And importantly, he survives the Infinity Saga to go on to getting his own show. And she doesn't. So yeah, we don't know her story. We've heard rumors, but despite her appearing in so many films, despite her amount of screen time being more than Bucky's, we don't know anything about her. All her screen time does is develop male characters.
I'm always picking up after you boys.
In Age of Ultron, when she's kidnapped, I thought the non-reaction from her teammates was just another moment of,
What man did this?
But given how the Avengers respond to her death, they have a bit of a reaction, but then go on with what they were going to do anyway. Add to that the fact that they can't recognize that Nebula is a different version now. Them not mourning Nat makes it clear that neither the characters nor the writers are especially concerned with who the female characters are. Why don't we see how Nat's Avengers take her death? Do the people who came back even know she died? Will we hear about how she led the Avengers for 5 years in the other shows that are coming up? Tony's legacy is already established in Spider-Man.
Oh, this is nice.
Steve's is in The Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Like it's someone else's. It isn't.
But will Nat even get one?
Don't give me hope.
Nat is not the only one to have a probable last appearance in this movie. Tony and Steve do as well. But other than their vastly greater amount of screen time, they also get catharsis in this movie. Tony gets to have a family, to parent his daughter, and to talk to his father about parenthood.
When the kid was born, were you nervous?
Steve is helping people, has learned from his past self, and ends with deciding to get some of that real life as well.
I think we both need to get a life.
You first.
But Nat's story is treated like it's over, but it never really existed. She played off of Tony, then Steve, then Bruce, getting all of them where they needed to go story-wise. She finally got to a place where she seems to feel fulfilled, and that's torn away from her twice. Her world has been shattered on 3 separate occasions, and she was not the focus of any of those times. And while she's certainly not alone in that, we can only go on so many emotional journeys per film after all, she's the only one whose story is over. Clint will go on to have a new protege, Sam will go on to become Captain America, Wanda will become the Scarlet Witch, Bucky will go on to get some closure, even Loki gets more to his story. Like all of them, she was mostly just supportive of the main characters. But unlike all of them, her solo outing is a prequel that might have no impact on the MCU going forward. And the wasted potential is a pretty big blow. Even ignoring the fact that she was the only female Avenger for a long time, we missed out on a lot of really good stories. Until now. Now, finally,
it's time for her story.
So, is Natasha more than a love interest? Does she have her own purpose in the story? Well, her goal is to bring everyone back, to make up for whom she used to be, to save the world. But that's not her narrative purpose. Her job is to help the main characters get a stone, and then they go on with the story without her. But after years of waiting, I have some hope.
I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you sooner.
And we can finally...
See you in a minute.
Under different circumstances, this would be totally awesome.
Alright, for my last recommendation, you should read The Web of Black Widow from 2019. It's good, a trippy story for her. But first, go see our girl's new movie.
We have unfinished business.
Thank you for listening to me talk about my favorite MCU character and her whole story thus far. Next time, we're heading back to the high seas to talk about Elizabeth Swann in Dead Man's Chest.
I'm listening. I'm listening intently.
Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things, so you don't miss it. See you then.